Hello, everybody. As folks begin to trickle in, we welcome you to the follow-up from our first webinar of the year. We had such a tremendous and overwhelming amount of responses and questions that came in that this became a twofer very quickly. So we'll let people get joining in, get James and I spotlighted here, and we will go ahead and get started. So as a follow-up to our discussion this month, we've really been focusing on optimization, peak performance in supply chain. And we know that supply chain is an element of an organization that touches not just one department, not just two, but almost every department has a key interest in how supply chain operations perform, evolve, and most importantly, give us data on what we should do next, how we should reassess what it is that we're going to do in the future, and how an organization is going to operate. Now, what's been really exciting about getting to know this client, James, from Hain Celestial, is that the Hain Celestial group is a leading health and wellness organization. I think in today's day and age, the United States over here on this side of the pond, we finally revisited our food pyramid. We finally revisited some of the recommendations. And so I think in that space, in this time, these are some of the questions that you probably have to ask from a political perspective, not just optimization and efficiency. So I'm really excited to have not only your perspective, but the industry that you represent here today. So without further ado, James, please introduce yourself. Tell us a little bit about your role at Hain Celestial, and we'll get into the incredible questions that came in as a result of your participation.
Yeah, hi everyone. So I'm James Cranfield. I'm the VP of International Supply Chain at Hain. So I manage our international business, which is basically everything outside North America. So predominantly UK, Ireland, and Europe. And I manage the end-to-end supply chain. So primarily that's everything outside operations within the business. So demand planning, customer services, logistics, supply planning, IVP processes. And so that keeps me fairly occupied on a regular basis.
Yeah, even not having the global purview. So something you said, I think really resonates too. A lot of our clients do have shared services that support them maybe in another geo, maybe a different time zone, internal organizations that are also, responsible. And then not only that, but figuring out what kind of synergies you can come up with at the company, despite the fact that supply chain operations are different from each country. So how do you collaborate with your peers as you guys forge on to innovation? And is there some sharing and some learnings? And, how much overlap is there? How much do you guys have to do that independently when you're thinking of optimizing a process at large?
Yeah, look, I think in some respects, you do look to optimize across the global business, or certainly across categories where it's applicable. I think it's more about having the right processes in place and make sure the processes are the same. We operate across quite a diverse portfolio of categories, both different temperature regimes and fundamentally different product categories, and so therefore there are differences, and we need to respect those differences and treat them with the due diligence that's required in those areas, while still trying to keep the basic processes the same across the entire organization.
No, that makes a lot of sense. And then, so let's take a step back before we dive completely into those differences are also about products. So when we think supply chain, a lot of the questions that came in was about, omni-channels, multi-product distribution, multi-product manufacturing through to distribution. Those can add some complexity. So of the diverse brands that the Hain Celestial umbrella represents, could you pick maybe a handful or a couple of them that maybe folks recognize, and tell us a little bit about what you do to evaluate the process end to end before getting into the transformative components of your assessment?
Yeah, so look, across the international business, some of our key brands, we've got the Ella's business, which is a baby food brand, primarily, and so historically that business was not fully integrated into the overall organizational structure, and the last couple of years we've integrated that from a supply chain perspective into our business. That business is primarily co-manufactured, whereas a lot of the rest of our portfolio is manufactured internally within our own manufacturing sites. So there's been a lot of process about how we integrate that business into our organizational structure. And most of our business across all of our brands, primarily we are dealing with retailers and delivering into the retailers. So we do a little bit of direct to consumer, but it's not the prevalent part of our organizational structure. Some of the other brands we've got some brands with huge heritage in the UK. So some of our jams and spreads business. We've got Hartley's Jams and Robertson's and Frank Cooper's, and these go back hundreds of years in terms of their brand's heritage. So there's a lot about making sure that we're maintaining the heritage and we're maintaining that level of customer loyalty and consumer loyalty to those brands going forward. And then we also do a lot. So, but our businesses both, we do brand, but we also do a huge amount of own label as well. And so it's getting the balance between those two businesses effective and making sure that we're utilising our factories effectively. I suppose the other business that people might know about, or one of our brands, is we do Linda McCartney, which is a vegetarian products, primarily in the UK, but also into various other countries, Australia and the Middle East. And that brand's got a lot of heritage in terms of the McCartney name, and so there's a lot around that we have to maintain and respect. And equally, that we've seen a huge, like in the last, I don't know, 5-10 years, we've seen a significant growth in that meat-free category, and then also it's had significant decline as well. And so it's about how do we stabilize that business, and how do we make sure that we're delivering the value that we need to deliver going forward.
No, that's so true and interesting, because it ties back to my point of the trends of the market,
yes,
right? In 1 minute we're, do not touch meat, you're part of the decline of civilization and the globe at large. And then on the other hand, if you do not have meat in your diet, you are not following the recommendation. So how do you guys keep up to speed with some of the things that are oncoming that aren't necessarily predictable in a data set as you make some of these decisions?
Yeah, look, it's very difficult, and luckily that's not necessarily my area of expertise. So we let the marketing and NPD teams, but it is. But like one of our big aspects is how do we drive innovation quicker in the business, and that's when supply chain does play a part, because it's how quickly we can get out and get that innovation into the marketplace, and that is what drives our organisation, and it's about how we continue to deliver that, and whether that is through our internal manufacturing sites, whether it's through co-manufacturers, it's how we work with our suppliers, and how we work with our customers to get those, the right innovation on the marketplace. And things will fail, and it's accepting that they will fail, and then being, as we say, fast to fail and then get something else back on again. And that's the important factor.
Yes, no, earmarking what you've learned and making sure that you put it forward. And ultimately, ironically, that's how we ultimately train our AI friends, right? Yes. Is continue to reteaching. So before we dive into the agentic and AI questions, which I know everybody's very excited about, being a history major myself, it's always important for me to kind of figure out where we came from and where we are. So in your 26 years in ops and supply chain, you just a healthy, range of technologies and different innovation tactics, outsourcing movements, tons of different things that have hit the supply chain deck as an answer to all your challenges. If you look back in your early days, what were some of the manual processes that you were like, oh my God, if only? Like, are there some things that now you guys just do and it's commonplace, but 26 years ago, it was like the biggest headache? Do you have any examples of those?
I mean, there's probably too many to name, in fairness, and I did think
one
about
major pain point.
I mean, there's lots of there's quite a lot of major pain points. I mean, some of them we still do today, and we haven't fixed yet.
And that's where we're gonna go next.
Yeah, exactly. But I think a lot of it is, we still use a lot of manual spreadsheets. But I was thinking about it actually. One of my very first jobs. So I remember when I think it was on a graduate scheme, and I remember having to fill in a budget, and it was a bit of paper. And having to fill it in. Now that seems very archaic, and it was only like, I don't know, 26 years ago. But that shows you how far we've come. And I even remember we had email for the first for the first time when I started working. It's like, well, we moved off this DOS-based system onto the first version of Microsoft Outlook. Now you think back now and how we communicate and how we utilize Teams and WhatsApp and all those other functionalities to communicate. Well, actually, we didn't have 24-hour communication back then. So there are lots of things where the simplest tasks. Now, you could argue, has it gone too far? Maybe, but at the same time, that ability to communicate and that ability to share data is so much better now than it was back 26 years ago.
Yes, and I think in your world, data drives all
Yes,
decisions. So
good
ultimately, that
data, good data,
exposure.
good data
Yeah,
drives.
good data,
Yes,
good data. No,
good
that's a
data.
very good qualifier. All right, so let's jump into the innovations that we're seeing today. I completely agree. I think it's so funny. Every time I go talk to a CFO, it doesn't matter what year we're in, they still have their spreadsheets. That's not going to go away completely.
Correct.
There's always going to be an element of pivot tabling my way to the answer in my head, right? So there's some mechanics that we won't ever be able to undo. But as you've been, kind of spearheading and looking at some of the innovation here, when you guys took the plunge to apply AI, and I want you to go to the beginning of that piece, a lot of the folks that are starting now, there's obvious concerns, right? AI getting out of hand, potentially making decisions that were not, thought through, and ultimately all of those things fit under the umbrella of governance. So as you guys, sought this out, first of all, was this a top-down mandate? Was this something that you guys saw? And as you approached it, how did you work with the rest of the organization to ensure that the governance guardrails were in place before you kind of launched into it?
Yeah, so okay, so let me take two parts. So yeah, so look, this was I think driven primarily by me initially.
Okay.
So and this was really trying to so we've got a huge amount of data and a huge amount of insight in our business, but we weren't using it very effectively. And equally, it was about really trying to understand, okay, we have an inventory strategy, we have a service level, we have an operational strategy, but where do they? How do we make better, quicker, more informed decisions going forward? And really, like, are some of the preconceived ideas of, and particularly this was regarding service level, are they actually right? Does it really drive empirical benefits in terms of availability on shelf? And is there a correlation there? And that's what we started with this whole project. And if there isn't a correlated trend, well, okay, why isn't there, and how does that vary going forward, and by retailer and by our categories? And then from that, it was like, okay, well, actually, look, if we can drive better and more intelligent decision making through the systems, how can we utilize our teams more effectively going forward, and how can we utilize their resources more effectively? And so yeah, there was a significant governance piece. I think we are still in the process of making people aware of what the benefit of AI is, and I think it would be fair to say we've had lots of conversations regarding the ROI on it, and making sure that we can actually properly quantify what the benefit of the solution is, because it's very easy to say, well, you've done that anyway. And so how can you say, well, that bit is the AI piece versus that bit is something you should have just done anyway? And I think that's still a challenge. And I think that's certainly a challenge across our organization, to be able to properly explain that and be able to call that out. And so that, I think, is the challenge that we're still facing. Although we can see the deliverables that we're now by utilizing the AI tools we've got, it is certainly improving our visibility and our insight and our ability to react to things that are going to happen in the future that AI is predicting for us.
Absolutely. No, and once you get that, once you can truly change the SG&A,
Yes,
amounts, and, and true values that are going to be, perceived, it's not just a project mentality anymore. And that's what we've really been driving. And I'm sure you're feeling the same thing. Everyone's project transformation fatigued. So when
yes.
you bring AI into the mix again, it's like, oh my gosh, one more person going to ask me how I do things today. And something I want to hone in on that you said, because this is the significant difference I'm seeing in the field, is it's not about what are you doing today. It's let's reimagine what tomorrow looks like, and really kind of getting that mindset in place to say, did we make up an SLA because 3 days was all we could conceivably do 15 years ago? Because that's what time that guy woke up and the other one that was answering the question was on the other side of the planet? Or did we make this up because there was true reason and rationale behind it?
Yeah, and that's exactly the point, right? So we all have a OTIF service level to deliver against, and ours is 98.5. And my real challenge, my question was, well, where did that come from? Like, what drove that? And I think it was probably made up by somebody at a point in time. But we're now all targeted against it. And that isn't to say it's right or wrong, but that is to say, well, if you're going to try and achieve that, what else is it driving in the background, that we can then either, and because ultimately there's a cost to achieve that. So therefore, how can you show the evidence, and how can you use AI to a point to be able to say, well, actually, that is, to hit that, I need to do this, and this, and there's a cost impact of doing that, versus I might be able to achieve a slightly lower service level, but I can actually still ensure that I'm getting the inventory on the shelf face. And that's probably where we started from. I think the bit we've expanded on is now actually being able to take our data and be able to properly impart the variability we see, either from a forecasting point of view or from a manufacturing point of view, means that we're getting a lot more proactive data in terms of how we manage our inventory going forward. And I said, and that is where we're sort of game changing it, because we're giving our customers more confidence in what we're going to supply, and that is the really important factor of it.
No, absolutely. Now, was there any triangulation of data when you were kind of looking at, those SLA, timelines, for example? Were they random? Were they poignant? The big question. Do you have to kind of liaise with customer service and see, what high frequency challenges are, or returns, or is there some element of data collection from other departments that helped you know these were the right use cases, or did you kind of have just a hunch, enough data within your own bounds?
We had a hunch to a point. We then put a lot of data in, but I think the data, and data, I think, has been probably our biggest Achilles heel in the whole process in some respects. I think we underestimated how good our data was. Going back to how good our data was, and look, even AI, if you put bad data in, you get bad data out the other end of it. And I think to a point we've gone through that learning curve. And certainly in terms of the initial investigation work we did, we had to go back over a couple of iterations of it. One, to make sure that the data was actually valid data, and it was supporting the outcomes. And then as we've gone through the AI project, we have had some delays in it due to the fact we've had to go back and reinforce the data that we've had and make sure that the robustness of our data can support the AI utilization.
Yeah, no, makes perfect sense. And there's a lot to consider, and there's a lot of it's skill sets outside of what you probably had to do for 26 years in supply chain. You got to sell a little, you got to, negotiate, you got to shimmy, and make sure everybody's on the same page.
Yes, absolutely. And I think, it's not just a skill set of the teams who are having to digest the data and look at the insight. It's a change of mindset for the entire organization, that this is actually something that can deliver benefit, and you've got to change people's belief systems quite substantially to do that.
Yes, you do indeed. So a couple of questions that came in, specific to your program, and I think a lot of people are curious as to how you chose a vendor. That's another thing that people ask. Is there's everybody in the world, and I know this too from being in the partner ecosystem. We have a .ai person reach out every single day asking if we want to be a services partner, right? So of the world of slews of .ais, what helped you land on Peak AI? What helped you decide that this was how you wanted to kind of go down the path, and what other determinations would you give advice about as you're thinking that through?
Yeah, so it's an interesting question. Our relationship with Peak probably went back 5 or 6 years. So there was a long sort of courting period before we even got to the point of going forward with them. And to some extent, I think there was one we went through. We did go through a number of validations with Peak, and there was lots of conversation around the solution they're offering. And in fairness, we have tailored the solution a bit more as we've gone through the process to make it fit for a fit purpose. It's not what we initially went forward with. And we did speak to other vendors out there, but I think we felt that the Peak had what we were looking for, Peak offered. And I think that was so basically it was a solution that we could go and see actually there was merit in it, and there was also other companies using it for similar sort of challenges that we were looking at. So we did initial sort of case studies and project phase with them before we went forward with the full solution to ensure that what we were going to go forward with there was some validity in the data before we went forward.
But let's pause there real quick, because I think a lot of people have questions about pilots. There is a question there too. Back in the day, we used to call them proof of concepts, right? Because nobody knew if the thing worked. Now, proof of value, then pilots. We have a couple, and then you bundle it in. So there's a number of ways to test this stuff out. And it sounds like you went through a few of those. So tell us a little bit about what that looked like, and what that took your team, what that required of your team to kind of engage in this process as well, because it is time consuming, and we want to be, clear to everybody that there's a lot to ask. So I'd love a little more detail.
Yeah, I think my team would say that I think it's fair to say we underestimate the amount of time it took to get over the road, right? Yes. And I think my team would probably not thank me for that on many levels. But I think so. We went through 3 or 4 scoping exercises, sort of small scale projects where we looked at very small data sets to try and scope out and understand that question regarding availability versus emotive data. And then once we've done that, we tested that across a number of categories, because we wanted to make sure that it wasn't just in one category, it was across every category we were going to go and deploy the solution to. And then we started an initial, I suppose you'd call it pilot in one of our categories, which we've then basically rolled out progressively across the rest of our categories. We haven't rolled out across all our categories yet, because there's some system integration issues that we need to work through, and there's some different complexity we have across the organization. But that's how we've sort of stage gated it throughout that process. And I think it's fair to say that as we've gone through that process, we have refined what we originally had in the spec quite substantially to get what we want out of it at the end of the day. And there was also conversations that we had with Peak regarding, well, actually what we thought the tool was going to do didn't actually deliver it. So therefore, and there was a bit of an understanding, and like I think we talk a supply chain language, they were talking an AI, an IT language, and so some things got lost maybe in the ether, which we had to go back through and say, okay, well actually that's what we're talking about delivering for us here.
No, and I think but that makes perfect sense. How, when the world requires business leaders to suddenly speak technology, and technologists to be able to understand processes that have been built man-made for decades, it's really hard to meet in the middle, and it's almost like, the analysts that continue to say that we're going to see kind of a flat ecosystem in an organization, and that the systems are going to connect us and the leaders are going to be like almost, polka dots along the way. It makes sense, because as we kind of deconstruct some of these processes, many of the policies that were put in place were man limiting. So if we're going to talk about man-woman limiting, profiles of a process, then we're never going to get to the true maximization of innovation. Everyone wants to know what the ROI is. Well, if you don't tap into the max, you're never going to see what that looks like, right?
Absolutely. Yeah.
So another question that I think is very interesting too is some of the different technologies that you may have pulled into your stack along the way, right? With with having been at Hain Celestial for 12 years, I'm sure there was other technologies that you pulled in. So how do you justify to leadership, hey, I know we had this 10 years ago, I don't want to renew it, but we're going to start with this. How do you justify some of the changes you may have made? Maybe you haven't made any, or decommission, sunset some things that maybe no longer work. How does that decisioning come in when you do your budget planning?
Yeah, it's still a fairly active conversation, I would say, at the moment, as around what we're taking out.
I'm so glad you're being honest about this.
Yeah, absolutely, and it is, because let's be honest, there is a large expense to this, right? And it's got to justify itself. We have integrated the solution into other of our planning tools currently, and we did debate quite long and hard internally whether or not could we take out other solutions that we've got and just have the Peak solution. And at the moment, we've determined that we can't, because they're doing slightly different things internally. But I think that's always the debate, right? And it's the bit that I'm always challenged on. How do I remove the cost of other solutions to pay for this, for the Peak solution? And I think it will be an ongoing debate, because ultimately we need to be more and more cost effective. And so yeah, we are having that debate currently, and we will continue to have that debate. And we haven't necessarily removed a lot out of the supply chain team in terms of solutions or systems that in effect the Peak solution is compensating for. I think the Peak solution is an additional solution on top of what we already had, because some of our legacy systems didn't offer this. And while some of the other solutions say, well, they do offer AI, or it's not really AI they're offering, and it's not really delivering the incremental benefit that we were looking for in this solution. And I think that's the bit you've got to be careful about. Is like, what actually are you getting offered, and then what is the end deliverable that you're going to get from that?
Yeah, no, absolutely. And in thinking of the operating model of a modern supply chain organization, the type of talent you have in-house has probably morphed and changed and moved along the way. So can you tell us a little bit about the evolution of the type of hires you have and the type of people that comprise your team in today's world versus 26 years ago?
Yeah. Yes, and I think more pertinently is that it's this pace of change is getting quicker and quicker as we go forward now. I mean, look, it is certainly it's a constant conversation. I actually had a talent meeting with my team last week, and a lot of what we're talking about now is, okay, how we need different types of individuals. So let's call about a supply chain planner 26 years ago was very much, they very, very fundamentally different. Whereas now we're not actually asking to plan the factory. That's all done by the systems. What we're asking for is their insight and their ability to be able to understand what they're being told and be able to interpret that and provide advice to the organization. So realistically, we have moved away from what you'd probably class as very basic administration in the team to now a higher level of competency with a higher degree of aptitude, and also the ability to be able to interpret and talk about that data and the outcomes with a wider portfolio across the organizational structure, and also with customers and suppliers. So there is yes, they need to be technologically savvy, absolutely, but it's more about the individual's ability to interpret that information. And in fairness, some of our team who've been with the business for a long time have gone through that change and are where they need to be now. And so it's great you see people evolve throughout their careers as they take on board this technology.
Yep. No, it's so cool. And, the other thing too, is that the way that things are being taught too, I think is giving several different, modes of learning. The one thing that you mentioned that can't be taught is context. And I think that's what we're seeing so much now. It's not just doing a job in a vacuum. It's even coders. We're seeing this as we upskill our developers now. There's Gen AI. They can code your work too, right? So as technology is taking different components of the human, the human construct, what we continue to find is the most important part is understanding the context. How does your job fit in with the success of the rest of the organization? And I think AI is empowering people to have kind of what they need to think that through, but having the discipline and almost the ambition to understand the context is another story.
Yeah, and I think to a point, right? AI is like, yes, AI is great, but I think it's still being able to have that human touch and being able to vocalize it. Absolutely. and be able to communicate it in a way that everyone understands. And I think that's the really important bit that we still need we need humans for. Definitely.
Yes. No, absolutely. And the other thing too is that it's still humans that we're trying to convince.
Yes,
I'm not trying to convince an AI CEO that this is a great idea. It's still a human, right? That we're talking to. It's still a human approving a budget. It's still a human that's going to have to interact with this. So the decision points are still very human. So you're absolutely right. And I've talked about this for 10 years since RPA. I've called it the ABCs of because we have a new acronym every 5 seconds with the ABCs of transformation. It's like pick a letter. We've had an acronym, like I promise you. So I think we're just missing Z, but I mean, we got a lot of them. So, but as we kind of think through what's next, right? We've sort of morphed once again to a new category. We've got AI that has now gone to agentic. And just so you know, James, the way I cast this, in the spirit of simplification, is that the agent is now finally the personification of what we've been talking about in RPA. It's truly, you used to call it an FTE equivalent. It wasn't exactly true. You used to think this was an alternative to outsourcing. not quite. It was pieces of a process that could be delivered before. We're now truly talking about agency, and where true functions can potentially be morphed and crafted into an agent that can produce them end to end. Now, of course, you have to have good data, you have to have good leadership, good processes in place, and understand where you got to send that little agent to go up and down their track. But we certainly have gotten to a place where the personification of this digital worker, really truly has come to pass. Now, as you think through, since you guys are AI savvy and AI literate, which is further along than many of the organizations, seeking answers to these things, when the new wave comes through and now it's agentic, how does your team process that? Do you say, nope, we're good, we're on our path, or do you absorb that and say we got to try it? Or do you just kind of pause? What are your cycles for new approaches?
So I think at the moment we're in the pause function. I think one of the things that we probably recognize on the journey we've been on so far is that we went into this all in, and actually we probably should have gone maybe a little bit slower, right? Because of the things I've talked about in terms of data and the complexity. And we have been having conversations about agentic, but I think we need to give the time now for the team and the business to catch up with where we are, and then we might go again. Because I think it's quite a leap of faith for some quite traditional businesses to go from where we've been right the way through on the agentic journey. And so that's where I am at the moment, is that we've been having conversations about it, but it's not something that, in a way, I want to deliver the solution we've got now as best as we possibly can do, with across all of our categories, rather than trying to keep going at a new thing. And I think sometimes, the new thing is always the shiny thing, but we sometimes need to take a little step and a pause before we go again.
Absolutely. No, and James, we believe that wholeheartedly. That's one of the things that I feel like a lot of my conversations at the start of this year have been more cautionary. And it's not that we say no, but we've thrown so much at our clients over the last 10 years. I mean, we've had folks that have been with us from the beginning, and 1 year they're implementing RPA, the next it's ML, then they're going to look at document understanding, and then we got some additional shiny things to add to the document understanding that now do pictures. And it's build a bear, until you get to this, kind of, behemoth that you're trying to not only maintain but justify in the organization. And so I think it's so important for everybody listening that's thinking of this too. And if it sounds daunting, that's good. I'm not here to say this is easy as pie. I never have believed in that rhetoric, because it's not. Transformation is as hard as the word sounds to spit out. There's a lot involved. So so we've definitely been on your track, James. And so the one thing that I'd love for you to add, to kind of your observations here in this is, when you're talking about this, internally, we've talked a lot about that. Where do you gather your insights on what to do next, or making sure you're not ahead of, behind the curve, rather? You say you went too fast. I will caution you there and say, no, you didn't. It's good that you get the learnings. It's good that you get the learnings fast. I really believe that. Tasting and feeling it is much better than what Gartner is going to tell you in a year. You did it. You know what I mean? So there's some good juju to having done it. But in that process, surely you seek, maybe literature or outside blogs or places to kind of educate yourself. Could you tell everybody a little bit about kind of how you keep up to speed with what the new shiny toy is?
Yeah, look, I think I do a fair amount of trawling and a fair amount of insight, reading, and just try to gauge where we are. So use the internet, go on blogs. Ultimately, sometimes you read stuff and you think, well, no, we're never going to go down that road. But equally, I actually even using AI to do a bit of research on the internet, because actually that's a lot quicker than trying to do a trawl. And one of the things we said to the team recently actually is just go and use AI, even things like simple as Copilot, because actually that saves you a huge amount of time, right? So I think it's about, for me, it's about trying to trying to understand where the rest of the business is, and what that net technology that's coming along might be, but equally being mindful that I've got to make sure that my team's ready for that next challenge as well. And so trying to share that with them to say, well, this is where we're going to go on the journey, and then imparting that across the rest of the organization. There's a lot of information out there, and I think it's important to read it and digest it, and then make your decision. And yes, you're right. We have taken the leap of faith, and that's great. And it shows you that it can be done. And it's been an eventful journey so far. And when I say I just think at times it's really about making sure our data was right. And I think if we'd spent another couple of months fixing our data at the start, we'd have sped the whole project up by about 6 to 8 months. And I think it's that bit that is, if I give any advice, it was make sure your data's good data before you go any further.
Yep, no, completely agree. And a tactical question came in throughout the course of this discussion here. I mean, I think you touched on it, but maybe not exactly what they were looking for. So if there was a specific KPI that you were hoping to improve, and have you achieved that, even if it's in a small morsel? Was there a specific KPI you can speak to? The one, and you mentioned one, but
yeah. So look, we were trying to improve OTIF while also reducing our inventory, and we have improved OTIF by about 8% year on year, which is great. And we've reduced our inventory levels, daily inventory levels down. So yes, we have achieved the objective. The challenge is that is really good and it's really positive. The challenge I got is a bit of what we had before, is how much of that could we have done without the AI, and how much, and this is where it becomes really subjective. And I think it's really, because it's really hard to make the proof points to say
it's time. Well, it's time to value, right?
Yeah, correct. And it's so it's like you can say that we yes, and it's like the time that we saved by not having to do all the other work on it. Again, it's quantifying that to be able to make it. So yeah, we've delivered the objectives that we set out to do. It's now really what we're trying to do now is to say, actually, well, let's quantify that in more detail, and let's really be able to quantify that to prove that this has delivered what it should have delivered.
Yep. No, I think that's exactly right. So hopefully that answers the question there. There are specific KPIs and it is.
Yes, and we have delivered them. Yes.
Yes. James is very humble about his successes so far. So I'm glad you did share that one with us. And so to close this out, James, in anticipation, we do kind of an early career program in March. And so I always love to ask everybody that's on here that's in a leadership role, that's looking at, kind of today's current technologies. How did you wind up here? Did you grow up one day and say, I want to be the supply chain executive of an organization? I'm sure you didn't. So tell me a little bit about how your journey led you here. I'm a history major and here I am. So we all have colorful paths, I find, in the AI space. So where did yours start, James?
Yeah, look, I did. I mean, what sort of director was it? So I did a supply chain degree at university, and then sort of fell into a career in mainly, started off in logistics, and then over the years progressed into sort of the more broader supply chain space. It was always something that interested me, sadly, whether that's positive or negative, I'm not sure. And look, people do say, like, no day's ever the same, and they're right. No day is ever the same. You come in the morning, you're never quite sure what's going to happen. And it's kept me entertained and amused and fed and watered for a number of years, and that's a positive outlook on where you get to from now. So yeah, look, I wouldn't, if you look back over your life and where you got to at this point in time, yeah, would you expect to be here when you're looking at, I don't know, 26 years ago or 30 years ago? No, but I think it's I'm fairly happy where I am at this moment in time. I have a really good team who work for me, which I think is really that you spend so much time with your team. That's the important factor. And so yeah, it's most days are enjoyable days at work.
That's awesome. No, that's so great. Well, no, yours sounds a lot more linear than mine. I'm from a supply chain and university to supply chain. I think that.
Yeah, I had a track. So yeah, I stayed on that track.
You stayed on the track. Well, that's good. And now you're deviating from it slightly by being an AI innovator. So we appreciate that.
Yes, yeah, absolutely. And but these things you've got to. If I didn't do that, my kids would be asking me why I'm not doing that sort of thing. And I think that they are a lot more adaptable than we are. So I am. So it's like you've got to stay ahead of them, really. So yeah.
Yes. Getting motivated by the children to continue innovation.
It's important. Correct.
Hey, if they're talking to Alexa and Siri about what the grocery orders are, I think we should probably follow suit. So
absolutely, yes.
Well, thank you so much for your time, James. Thanks for answering the slew of questions that came in last week. Everybody, thank you for staying tuned, and we'll be sending this off to everybody who is participating. I know we added this to the agenda as a part 2, so it conflicted with some of the times of the registrants. But James, thanks once again for your time, your invaluable knowledge, and we're going to check in with you in about 6 months, and let's see where we stand then. Okay. All right. Perfect. Thanks so much, James. Take care. Bye everybody.